Awesome. Thank you, Steve. I'm Alice. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Thank you for the invite. Glad to be here. Um, Step two, man. I'm kind of I never know how I'm going to start, and it's just funny that before the meeting started, we somehow got on the topic of cats, and a cat factors into my personal step two experience. But that's not in the big book. It doesn't have to be yours, I swear. And I'm going to share from the big book, but also a little bit of my personal experience with step two, as well as some of my former misconceptions about it. Um, I before I came in to the rooms, I knew so much about 12-step programs that without even setting foot in one, I had all these very fixed ideas about everything, and I believed my opinion over anything else. And I'm really, really grateful for um, all the years of powerlessness and trying not to be powerless that finally convinced me to come to believe that maybe just maybe there's something bigger than me that can restore me to much needed sanity. Um, in fact, that's the first thing I want to kind of share about this step is, in step two, it says come to believe that, not in. And that was an important distinction that I just didn't see at first. Again, with my fixed ideas, I thought that I had to believe in God or create my own God. I had to conjure something up, create my own creator, which sounds silly now, but of course, at the time it was like I thought that was part of the process, and thank goodness it's not. I just simply had to come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And so first I had to see my own powerlessness and my own insanity. And I fought that for so long, so long. I just tried to just not drink, prove that I got this, all of those things. And it was by experiencing firsthand drinking when I didn't want to drink, and realizing that there was nothing I could do to stop myself. I love in the big book that we have an actual definition of insanity that's, it's not necessarily Einstein's definition of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Sometimes that's what I did, but not always. On page 37, it says, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? And it goes on to explain how my sound reasoning failed to hold me in check. In some circumstances, I set out deliberately to get drunk. And even when it was deliberate and it felt like a choice, it was still an act of insanity, because beforehand I'd decide I'm not going to do this. Afterwards, I'd regret it. It turns out those actions of picking up that first drink or other forms of self-harm were, it's insane action. It's not a choice. And when that finally dropped from my head to my heart, I'm not so picky about the life preserver anymore, because I finally realized I'm drowning. And that's what step two is about. In my experience, in my personal experience, as well as working with others, once that first step is goes from the head to the heart, is like an oh shit moment, then step two becomes instinctual, like trying to force yourself to drown and you can't. You fight to the surface, you reach for whatever flimsy reed is there, and it is there. That loving presence had always been there, and I couldn't access it. I couldn't feel it until I desperately needed it. And so when the moment of clarity, I suppose, for me was when my husband had walked in on me drinking right out of a bottle. And I was about to check, I was getting my bags packed to go to detox. And, he'd seen me drink out of the bottle before, but this time I'm like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I want help, blah, blah, blah. And he comes in and he catches me drinking right out of a bottle and he goes, "Is that going to be your last drink?" And I was like, and I suddenly realized, how could I possibly know that? It's not just a lack of control when drinking, it's a lack of control when sober too. And we get down to the detox facility, and here's where the goofy cat comes in, and I'll read some more of the book. But we get down to the detox facility, and they led me back to my room, and there was a cat sitting on the bed. And it felt like a sign from the universe, that it was just there for me, that everything's okay. Not that I'm going to be okay, but I am okay right now. And I fell to my knees and I started crying. And that detox was right next to a meeting, and they made us go. And for the first time in my life, I heard the word God with different ears. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't preaching. It was somebody offering me an experience that I desperately needed, and one that was available to me. Thank God. So, that recognition of powerlessness, that recognition that my actions are insane, absolutely crucial to step 2. And then if I go in the big book to page 44, that great first paragraph that sums up what alcoholism is in the preceding chapters. You have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. I wasn't interested in your spiritual experience until my human power had failed, and I recognized that. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Of course not. Alcoholic death didn't sound so bad. I didn't want to live very much. I wanted to just die peacefully in my sleep. But, those alternatives, it sounds so logical now, but at the time that I was struggling, and when many of us are struggling, it's like, what do you mean live on a spiritual basis? I have to be a saint? I don't know what that means. Do I have to learn yoga? Do I have to climb a mountain? Like, I don't understand. I'll pick death, please, because I didn't know what you were offering. Thank God for this book. Thank God for how it lays it out. And thank God for step 1, quite frankly, because I wouldn't have been interested in step 2. But it isn't so difficult. And I love this. I love that about half of our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope. We were not true alcoholics, but after a while, we had to face the fact we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Thought we were. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. And here's the thing, it was very comforting to find that about half of the founders were atheist or agnostic. That whether you're coming in with belief or no belief, we're welcome here, and the solution is the same. And check it out. So now it says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So, I thought I was a good person. Like, isn't that enough? Or just do the next right thing. Isn't that enough? Um, and I love that, again, in the previous chapters, I'm going to go to 27. This is the example of Roland Hazard, who goes to see Dr. Young, and he's under his care for a year and has all this confidence. He understands his mind now. Relapse is unthinkable, but then he drinks again, and how Dr. Young explains to him that, like, yeah, here and there, once in a while, you guys recover. But it's really random, and I don't know how to. I've been trying to do it myself. Um, but you need to have this vital spiritual experience. And I'm reading the bottom paragraph of page 27. Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected that after all, he was a good church member. This hope, however, was destroyed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. His religious convictions are good, and I'm not going to bash religion in any way. It's just that whether the person is a believer or unbeliever, their dilemma is the same: lack of power. And so I love we have this example of this guy who is, he's a good churchman. His religious convictions are very good, but it's not enough. And then on the next page at the bottom of 28, it says, in the following chapter, there appears an explanation of alcoholism. So I was talking about chapter 3. Then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. Many who were once in this class, being agnostic, are now among our members. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. That's so backwards than what I thought it was going to be. Like, religious convictions aren't enough, but being an agnostic isn't a barrier either. How about that? Because regardless, it's lack of power. We can try to be good people. We can have religious convictions or agnostic convictions or atheist convictions. And regardless, it's just lack of power. And this book shows us how to access that power. So if I'm back over to 45, I'm going to skip down to where it says lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how are we to find this power? That's exactly what this book is about. And I like sticking with that word power, when I'm working with somebody, because again, whether they believe in God or a higher power or not, that is what's missing. And so whether the person has certain prejudice against spiritual terms, or they think they already know what those spiritual terms mean, and have strong religious convictions and feel like, I already have God, nothing's missing, I don't need to learn anything in step 2. Again, the dilemma is the same. There's lack of power. Let's access it. And then this chapter goes into over and over again the importance of setting aside prejudice. And I think it's important for the believer or the unbeliever. This chapter is mainly, like, the first several times I read it, I'm thinking, it's we agnostics. And I'm thinking from that point of view. And yet, how eye-opening it is for the person who is already full of faith or who has religious convictions, because we can all see where we might be agnostic, where we might be without knowledge, or we might have fixed ideas, prejudice. And when I go over to page 46, the middle paragraph, I love this because, again, this, shattered my preconceived notions of what this step was about, where it says, yes, we have agnostic temperament, have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, you tell me to stop thinking a certain way, my hackles get up. But lay aside, okay, I can do that. Lay aside my prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves. We commence to get results, even though, and here it is, it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. Impossible. I thought I had to write an essay of like what I wanted in God. And not that that's a bad thing. That can be certainly a valuable exercise, but it's not what the book is telling us we have to do at this point. I cannot conjure God. I am not creating him. I'm making space by setting aside my fixed ideas and seeing that I need this this power. I currently don't have it, and I desperately need this power. And when I realize that, it the door opens. You know, I think of this power as like oxygen. You know, like it had always been all around me, keeping me alive, whether I know it or not, whether I'm paying attention to it or not. But when I slow down and pay attention to my breath, or look at the trees waving in the breeze, I'm having a totally different experience. I didn't create oxygen or come up with an acronym or a cute name to call my oxygen. I just became willing to be open to its presence, which is already here. If I go over to page 47, and this middle paragraph, which is like the go-to for step 2 and working with somebody, again, keeping it simple. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. That was great news. Isn't it great news? That it is so simple. It's just about having that open mind. It's just being open to this idea, and that power just starts flowing. You know, it's like, again, in my experience, after seeing that cat, that just was like, oh, this is, you know, is this what spirituality is like? Signs, you know, like evidence. And back over on page 25, there's that great line that that talks about, but we saw that it really worked in others, you know, and there's evidence. You know, I meet these people in the rooms who are like talking about these shady pasts, and, you know, and I could tell that they understood my current pain, but they're on a whole other side now. And I believed them. And I wanted what they had, and I believed that it was available to me. I could see that it worked in them. I could see evidence. It's like, I don't have to, I don't know what I'm going to say. The evidence is right there in the people. But as I started following these actions, I sort of started feeling it for myself too. I'm going to go on to page 52. And I realize I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff in this chapter in We Agnostics. And when I'm working with somebody, sometimes I'll read line by line through this whole chapter, sometimes not. I just try to use my own intuition here, because I've been guilty of like doing that question on page 47, and the person is like, yeah, I'm willing to believe. And I'm like, great. You know, and then I'm reading about the prosaic steel girder and like, you know, kind of lose them a little bit. It's like, oh, no, maybe we should just like, you know, move on to step 3 from here, you know, like it really doesn't have to, we don't have to dwell here. The open mind is what's important. And if the person is open to spiritual matters, open to the God idea, regardless of what we call it, or being unable to describe it, unable to understand it. Of course, I'm unable to understand it. It's bigger than me. It's indescribable, but it becomes tangible. It becomes experiential when I'm open to it. Again, like I slow down and pay attention to my breath. It's there. But if I go to page 52, middle paragraph, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems. Our human problems. We're not necessarily talking about alcoholism or other afflictions right now. We're talking about our human problems, any life run on self-will. The same readiness to change our point of view. Oh, and I skipped it, the paragraph above that. Isn't this amazing that back in 1939, this book was written talking about throwing away, theories or gadgets for the new one, when we obviously do that today with, iPhones and whatever. It's just so timeless and relevant. So it says we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships, couldn't control our emotional natures, prey to misery and depression, couldn't make a living, had a feeling of uselessness, full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real use to other people, real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. Basic solution. These bedevilments sound so heavy, right? So like heavy going of life, like life is so impossible and I need a unique solution to each of these unique problems. And that the good news is, no, I don't. When we saw others, again, I'm seeing evidence in people, when we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. And I couldn't help but see it. I couldn't not see it by this point in my recovery. There was no doubt that my ideas didn't work. My ideas had me smack dab in these bedevilments, miserable. I was making money, but I couldn't make a living. Couldn't be of real help to other people. Prey to misery and depression, couldn't control my emotional nature. And yet all of those problems are solved by a very simple reliance on this power that is everything. Has to be. On the next page in the middle, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition, either God is everything, or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? And that choice doesn't mean that I'm making God into everything. It's that these are my options at this point. I can stay stuck in my misery, my ideas, my very limited power, and look where it gets me. Or I can be open to this God idea that I don't have to understand to experience. And then this God idea is everything. My ability to use logic and reason, although it could work in other areas of my life, when it came to my alcoholism, nope. It failed utterly, and not only that, but I find myself trying to impose my self-will in all of these problems that I have in my life, and I'm just making things worse. So yeah, if there's a better way, absolutely, I'll take it. And thank God it's simple. I'm going to skip on over to page 55. And I love this paragraph. Actually, we were fooling ourselves. For deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by pride, by worship of other things. I worship the bottle, as well as plenty of other things, money, vanity. But in some form or other, it is there for faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup just as much as we have for a friend. So I grew up in a religious household, and at a very young age, I rejected those ideas and believed that I wasn't missing out on anything. I believed that, faith was just something some people are born with and some aren't, and I just wasn't. And I got that idea from the fact that my sister always wanted to go to church. She was always into it, and I wasn't. And I just thought, that's her. Like, that's cool. I'm not missing out on anything. That's fine. And, I finally make it into the rooms and have the experiences that I described, and I'm blown away. And for the first time in my life, I'm feeling this tangible presence, this absolute certainty that this power exists, and I need it, and it's available, and it's loving. And it felt like the first time in my life ever, knowing in my heart that this power is available to me. And when I was a few years sober, I went back home to visit my family. They're in the Midwest. And my mom pulled out a bunch of papers, and there was a bunch of drawings and poems by me as a child. And you know what the poems were about? Not cats. They were about God. I had no memory of it. And I see it in my childlike handwriting, signed Alice, age 6, or whatever I was. And I'm like, it was there. All those decades, it was there. Thank God. Thank God for my powerlessness that brought me to my knees, where I became willing to sit on your stupid folding chairs and drink your bad coffee and listen and accept something I didn't think would be available. And here it is. Thank God for that, And so when I read this, it's like, yeah, it's deep down there the whole time. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. In the last analysis, I don't need to analyze this anymore. In fact, my analyzing got in the way. Again, imagine trying to analyze air before breathing. We don't have to do that. It's just here. It's just here. I'm gonna just again in my attempt to keep step 2 simple, and how it's about open-mindedness, not trying to create God, and how we may or may not believe at this point, but an open mind is enough to bring us through to step 3. If I skip on over to page 75, where we have the 5th step promises, check it out. It says we pocket our pride and go to it, eliminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. Maybe we hadn't felt it up until then. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, which means maybe we didn't. And that's okay. Because by step 5, we now begin to have a spiritual experience. Now we do. I may not have this big spiritual experience at step 2. Keep it simple, the open mind. and we're on our way. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Isn't that cool, though? Isn't that cool that, like, my not knowing, my not understanding, my not being able to describe this power doesn't have to get in the way, because it's not up to me. I just have to be open to it, recognize my need for it, recognize that I'm drowning, and I'll reach for that flimsy reed. And by taking the rest of the steps, that flimsy reed becomes so much more. I'd be remiss if I didn't read a little something. Oh my God. Would you? I'm so sorry. I was going to read the appendix in the back, the spiritual experience, and it fell off the back of my book. See, I only go to page 566 now. It's gone. I've gone through a few books. Anyway, there's this great line in that appendix in the back, the spiritual experience, which the big book suggests we go back and read. There's like 3 times that we get that little asterisk at the bottom of the page suggesting we go read it. And there's this great line about how we're suddenly able to tap this unsuspected inner resource, and how our friends might notice the change in us before we do. But this spiritual experience is available. And even if we have the educational variety, meaning it happens over a period of time rather than a bright light, it happens. And you may not notice it at the time, but it happens. Doesn't mean it's not powerful. A friend of mine uses this analogy. Imagine you have a pounding headache and you take an aspirin and the headache goes away. When did the headache go away? But what a change, right? And you don't really notice, but if someone were like, hey, how's that headache? You'd be like, oh my God, it's completely gone. And that's what the spiritual experience might be like. What a change. I personally had a bright light experience that I can't describe. I can't do it justice. I sure didn't earn it, but something happened. And since that day, there's been a rock solid faith that God is, and the relationship with him just keeps getting bigger and better. And I keep getting smaller. And my conception of God is over time, I realize I know so little, and that's a good thing. Like, the world just keeps getting bigger and better as a result. And again, I don't want to complicate matters, because if anyone here is struggling and you're not feeling that faith, don't worry. Don't worry. It really is, I promise you, just about open-mindedness. And if you have a true step 1 experience, step 2 becomes instinctual. And then you get to go on to step 3, and it keeps getting better. And I'm not sure if my time is up, but I feel like that's enough out of me. I love you guys. Thank you so much for letting me share.